So you've heard about the 5-second rule. You know, when you drop something on the floor and you wait 5 seconds, you can't eat it. But before that 5 seconds, doesn't matter how dirty the floor is, you can still pick it up and eat it. Well, what about the 18-minute rule? Have you heard of the 18-minute rule? Let's find out. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Torah for Women Ministries. This is Judith Garten. And yes, I'm wearing my biblical prepping apron today because I am going to be cooking something in the kitchen for you. This is a prepping recipe in that it uses only the ingredients we have in our food storage. I'm going to try and make some old-fashioned, ancient-style flatbread as they would have made on the day of Passover before the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts. The only ingredients I have are sea salt. Now we use pink Himalayan sea salt. I have whole wheat flour. This is my favorite blend right here. It is 50% Prairie Gold and 50% sprouted hard white wheat. Now I had to set this out earlier today because I keep it in the freezer to keep it fresh for longer. So that is my mixture there in my bowl. And my thermometer is not 100% accurate in the room, but if you look at my Pampered Chef digital thermometer, I love this, love this thermometer. It is so accurate when I'm using it in food and whatnot. It keeps teetering between 62 and 64 degrees. That's about what our room temperature is right now. What I did was I heated up some water to make the water room temperature because it was actually chilled too. It comes out of the ground icy cold this time of year still. So I had to heat that up a little bit. It is at about 69 degrees. So it's a little bit warmer than our current room temperature. And there's a reason why I'm doing that. I'm going to try and do this as accurately as possible with my electronic equipment here, my electric stove and the camera. But I'm planning to show you about how they would have made their unleavened bread. Now, a lot of people are under the impression that you had to get it all baked within 18 minutes. And I'm going to show you that's not likely possible. The 18-minute rule is a rabbinic rule, and I'll be doing an episode on that more fully down the line. Now I've greased my skillet. There's a reason why I'm using a cast iron skillet. History shows, historical artifacts have been found to demonstrate that there are a number of different fire pots or fire domes that have been discovered, and they were used in two ways. Now fire domes can have a bottom and a top. Let me show you, for example. This pot, make it a little closer. See? It is a Moroccan tagine. It was purchased for us as a gift. We've not used it because unfortunately it came with a label that said it was not for use with food, which we thought was ironic. This is the dome top, and this is the ceramic base. It is a terracotta. You can purchase them for using on your gas and electric range. There are some that are food safe. This one is not. So we use it for decoration, but it does come in handy as a nice little example of what was available at the time. They were also made out of metal. Sometimes the domes, as they were rounded, would have been used to cook food in, like this tagine would be. Other times the domes were used over the coals to make bread. And the bread was not baked in the dome or under the dome in the bottom pot. It was actually made on the top. So what we're going to do is use our frying pan as that example. I don't have a dome, so we're going to use our cast iron skillet. Now I've done this before with other breads, but this is going to be 100% fresh, right mixed up from the beginning. Now, I'm going to turn my skillet on just to get it slightly warm. I'll probably up the temperature as I go along, because this is how they would have made dough. I have about 3 cups of flour. I'm hoping this makes 8 to 10, possibly 12 flatbreads, but that will be determined as I go along. I'm going to use a little over a teaspoon of salt. Now, let me tell you something right off the bat. Oh no! I just added yeast. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Yeast is in the air around you. The ancient Israelites lived in homes that were made of stone or brick and mortar. The mortar would have been made from the soil around them. Their floors were generally made of soil. We get into a lot of tradition when it comes to the Passover, and we think we have to sterilize our home to get out every microscopic piece of leaven. It is impossible, because right now, I just breathed in yeast. I also probably breathed it out. It's there. It exists in the air, and is actually a blessing to us because it will make leavened bread. I'll show you what I mean by that. This dough here has had no yeast added. It is just simply a leavened dough. If you can see all the bubbles in the bottom, this is almost 7 days old. I'm using this as an experiment, and I'll show you more as the weeks go on. Now for the Passover, they would not have allowed their dough to set and rise. They would have baked it fresh. So this is what they would have done. First of all, you're working with a whole grain. A whole grain flour needs to be ground either by hand or at the mill. They could have used a mill to grind their flour. They also could have used a mortar and pestle. However, this one is very small and would not grind grain for me. They also could have used a rock. Now, there have been wonderful discoveries made in some ancient homes that are attributed to ancient Israelites around the time of the Exodus. And some are a stone, what they now call bowl, and a stone that was used to grind the flour. Some people would not use a mill or a mortar and pestle. They would use a mortar and pestle style bowl, and as time went on, they would wear a hole, an indent in that, and that's what formed their bowl, because they were grinding that flour. And they would grind it as they needed it. Sometimes they would grind it ahead of time, and they would keep leftovers in jars. Now, we have all these modern conveniences. We don't have to have ours ground fresh. I do have a hand grinder. We hate using it, to be honest. Now, this flour is manufacturer ground, or the grower ground, because I buy this from Wheat Montana, the Prairie Gold. The sprouted grain flour is another brand, but I threw away the bag, so I'm not sure the brand on that one, and I'm going to be purchasing some from another grower soon. Both are organic in this case. Sometimes I cannot get the organic, so I buy the next best. But Prairie Gold is my absolute favorite. I've been using it for over 30 years. It's wonderful. It used to have another name, but it's now called Prairie Gold. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make in the middle of my flour an indent. Very simple, like so. And I'm going to add water in there. I'm not sure how much water. One thing I've learned over the years with baking with whole wheat bread, it depends on your humidity in your house, your air, the day of the week. Sometimes I could tell you in a recipe to add 2.5 cups of water, but what might end up happening is I need to add more. So we're going to add the water and see what happens. I'm adding probably about a cup to a cup and a half. And then we start to mix it in. Now, if you use white flour, there is something in flour, whether it's whole wheat or whether it's white, called gluten. A lot of you might be familiar with gluten because there are people who are gluten sensitive and some people who have celiac disease. Now, my gooey hands are telling me I added a little too much water today. So we are going to scoop out some flour from my flour tub. I don't want to add too much because the dough will actually start to dry out as I knead the dough. I just need to get it to the point where I can get all this goo off of my hands and knead it without a problem. Now I'm going to remove my dough from my bowl. Sometimes I will knead it in a larger bowl. It's called a kneading bowl. Many of the Israelites used a kneading trough, which is actually more like a long bowl made of wood or some other material. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to knead this for the right amount of time. Now if you notice, it took me about 2 to 3 minutes talking to you and mixing this up. Cut about half of it off. So it's 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes that it took me just to mix it up. I'm telling you that for a reason. Next, I need to knead this until it's the right consistency. That's going to take me a minimum of 8 minutes. We're already up to 10 minutes. Remember that 18-minute mark. Back to the topic of the gluten. You want to release that gluten from your dough. And if you have a whole grain flour, the dough takes longer to knead than it would a white flour. You want to use the butt of your hand and press into your dough. You may need to lightly dust now and then because you don't want it to stick to your countertop. I use my thumb sometimes to push in as well on the sides as the dough elongates. And I set my timer so I can do my minimum of 8 minutes. If at the end of 8 minutes it doesn't look like it's the elasticy dough that I'm looking for, then I will need to do another 2 minutes. And that time period is dependent upon the type of flour you're using, the type of grain you're using, the time of day, the atmosphere, where you live, the elevation, because we're at a higher elevation than some people. This is a good arm workout. If you're looking for an arm workout, it works the lower arm, upper arm, palms of your hand, fingers. It does a good job. All right. 2 minutes down. There's a reason why in some of my other videos I use the mixer, because the mixer can do it in about 5 minutes. I love the mixer. But you know, they didn't have a KitchenAid in Israel. They didn't have a KitchenAid in Egypt. They didn't have a KitchenAid in their little homes and hovels. They just didn't. They had good old-fashioned muscle. All right, I'm back with my voice and everything. This is my dough ball. Oop, I always forget to get in there right in the middle. This is my dough ball. Now, I've noticed something interesting as I've been kneading this particular ball of dough. A bubble is forming on the inside. What does that mean? It means that whether I like it or not, the yeast from the air that fell into my dough is actually already causing a tiny bit of leaven. Now, it's not truly a leavened bread though. It's actually an unleavened ball of dough because it's not been allowed to sit and feed like the other dough that I showed you. Now, I've formed it into a ball as though I was going to make a loaf of bread. I'm going to cut it into, I'm actually going to form it in a little bit more of an elongated piece. And this dough, I'm going to cut it into 8 pieces. I don't think it's going to make it for 10. So let's see what happens. I picked up a simple plastic cutting board to use on the countertop for such occasions. I also have a piece of parchment. I'm just going to hand press. I'm not going to roll these out. Oh, I might actually get 12. Now you take your dough ball and you form it into a ball by pinching on the bottom. And you put that pinched portion down onto your rolling surface. I did mix this a little bit too much as far as flour goes. It is not as elastic as I like, so it's taking a little more effort for me to stretch it. While it cooks on one side, you can form your next piece of dough. It takes about a minute or so on each side. You don't want to let it burn. This is so tough, I have to resort to my hand roller. Much more even. There we go. Now this one's going to be a little smaller. It is the end piece that is from the pointy part of the ball of dough. I tend to not make those as even in dough as, as the middle pieces. Now, it's not puffing up like a peep pocket, but it is starting to puff up a little bit. We're going to flip it. Pretty sure it's about ready. No, it's not. How about that? All right, we're going to leave it for a little bit longer. I don't think the pan is quite hot enough. I will say that if the dough was the right consistency for what I prefer, this would stick to the dough as I roll it if it was not floured. I'm not having it stick right now, so this is a little tougher than I like. I do have to say I'm really liking this plastic cutting board. And it was just a simple one from the dollar store. I liked the fact that it is BPA free. If you'll notice, I have leftover flour and dough scraps. That will just be scraped in the trash. Now, I want to mention something here very important that is scriptural, and I will post the scripture in the video. When the Israelites left, they took a piece of this dough. It was not starter like we are familiar with today. It was not sourdough starter. It was dough. it may be considered a starter, but they took this lump. But the Bible does not say how big. So it could have been this lump, or this lump, but they took a lump. Now this one turned out lovely. See if you can see all the lovely little brown dimples. However, it did not puff up. It didn't pita pocket. Let's toss in another one. The pan is much hotter now. So let's see what it's going to do. I'm going to turn the temperature down just a tiny bit. Back to the dough ball. They took a piece of cloth and they wrapped that up. And I'm just going to pretend I have a bowl. They took their kneading bowls, their kneading trough, and they put it in, and they tied it on their shoulders, and they carried this from Ramesses to Sukkot. Now, as they rolled out their dough, depending on how big their dough ball was to begin with, what they were working with, they would have been working with the dough with their hands, flattening it out to make their little pita pocket or pitas, and then throwing them on their hot stone, or hot whatever they were using to cook it with. And I don't know if you can see it in the pan. I'm going to have to do a close-up. I'm getting a pita pocket, people. People will always tell me that that's because I added yeast. I did not add yeast. I promise you, I did not add yeast at all. Except for that joke I made where it fell in the bowl. It's just doing what it normally does. Take a close-up look. A little overdone, but not too bad. But it is definitely puffed up. See how puffy it got? The hotter the pan, the more puffy they tend to be for me. So this one is almost completely done all the way through, but it did not puff up all the way through. It only puffed up in a part of it. This part did not. It's thicker like the first pita. But there we go. Pita pocket. Let's throw in another one. As you know, I'm not leavening this dough in any way at all. It is just doing what it does. Now, what I started to say with the women, and possibly the children, as they would roll out their dough, they could only do so many at a time. They're only human. So for anyone to tell you that it all took place in 18 minutes, I can promise you, I started this around 9:45 on my clock, I believe, maybe a little bit later, and it is 10:32. Because you have to knead the dough, and roll the dough or pat the dough, and cook the dough, it is what it is. 18 minutes is impossible. I thought you'd like to see a quick look at the inside. The pita pocket part, and the piece that only partially pita pocketed. This whole section down here and over to here did not pocket. So that's more like just a plain flatbread, while this is a nice lovely pocket for a sandwich. I have another one pocketing. We're going to flip it over. Again, I made it too done. This is why you have to watch your dough while it cooks. Now I made the 6 smaller ones. The last dough I only divided into 4. I'm going to make those a little bit larger. The first time you make something like this, don't be afraid to start with your pan a little bit lower. The lower the temperature, I have learned, the more likely it is to be more of a flatbread rather than a pita pocket. Now, I was I was speaking with a lady earlier today online, and I mentioned there is a lovely Greek restaurant or two in New Jersey that we used to go to, and they serve pitas that are more like this pita. They're just flatbread. They're a little thick. Theirs are actually a little thicker than this. And they're soft, and they're delicious, dipped in soups, stews, chicken, whatever you order. And we loved them. So making them at home is really fun. Now, how does it taste? Perfect. I got a total of 10 pitas from this batch. I actually should have probably only made 8. Some of them are pretty small and burnt, but they still taste delicious. I hope this has helped you understand. There's no 18-minute rule. You do not have to eat flatbread certified by a rabbi as kosher for Passover, because these are for Passover. Blessings and shalom.